The Institute of Internal Auditors presents All Things Internal Audit Tech. In this episode, Aadesh Gandhre is joined by Dave Montez and Richard Penfil to introduce swarm auditing, an emerging approach that combines human judgment with orchestrated AI agents working in parallel. They discuss how audit functions can move beyond prompt libraries, embed AI directly into audit workflows, and rethink the operating model of assurance without sacrificing independence or professional judgment.
Hi, my name is Aadesh Gandhre. I'm a Chief Audit Executive at DTCC. So internal audit has always been about assurance, but the way risk shows up today has fundamentally changed. Risk is continuous, digital, and increasingly driven by AI-enabled decisions at machine speed. Yet, many audit models still operate like they're in the world of fixed scopes and hindsight reviews. So I'm really thrilled to be joined by Dave Montez, Chief Audit Executive at PayPal, and Richard Penfil, who is the Data Science Manager in Audit Operations at PayPal, the two leaders who aren't just experimenting with AI, but rethinking the operating model of audit itself. So this conversation is about the mindset shifts, leadership courage, and what it really takes to move from the pilot projects to scalable and responsible innovation. So Dave and Richard, take us back to the moment when the traditional audit model started to feel insufficient, and what experiences in your careers led you to rethink how audit work, gets done, and ultimately to experimenting with swarm-based approaches.
Sure. Why don't I start with that, Rich, and then I'll pass it over to you. I've been at the internal audit game for a lot of years. I actually started my career with Coopers and Lybrand, which is PricewaterhouseCoopers now. And in my second year, they introduced the computer. That's how long I've been in the business. So things are constantly changing. Technologies are changing. Control design, risk programs are changing constantly. So internal audit, as anyone who's been in the business for a while, as you know, it's not static. It's constantly on a change. So this is just another evolution of what internal audit will be in the future and what the control and risk environment will be in the future. Here in PayPal, we challenge ourselves annually on our entire design of our team, our approach to audit, and compliance with the IAA standards. And as you know, the new standards are extremely rigorous. And so that's something that's played a large role in the design of our future of internal audit. And when AI became a common used approach to internal audit, we had to not only rethink holistically how we approach internal audit and how we document what we do and how we risk assess what we do, but we also had other challenges going on in the organization of how do you actually implement AI as just an individual on a team, as opposed to the grand views that we're taking a look at holistically for the team. So it was a parallel evolution that, again, it'll be constant. What we do now will be different what we do next year. What we do next year will be different. What we do, and so on and so on and so on. So it's constantly evolving, as it always has. It's just evolving at a lightning speed pace now with the use of large language models and the tools associated with it. So that's been our journey, and we've been on this accelerated journey for about a year and a half now. And we actually redesigned our team structure, where we had something called an advisory portfolio, where we had a group of people dedicated to doing consulting work out in the business. And you talked about adding value. This is one of those ways that we added value above and beyond just the audit process. And then during the audit process, it's also the tools that we developed for the first and second line to use to look at data the way we look at it and to find the results that we find and more. So that's the constant evolution of the audit process. And then ours in and of itself, Rich is an extremely talented individual who has a vision, not just of what we do, but what we can do and how we can be better. And he designed this concept of swarm agents and swarm auditing. So I'll turn it over to Rich to talk about that piece.
I guess a little personal journey. Prior to PayPal, I had been a data scientist in all three lines of defense, including in an internal audit department with over 1,500 auditors. There, I had used GPT-2, which was prior to ChatGPT, for data analytics. But I remember the day that ChatGPT came out and my social blew up. And that same week, Dave and I were on a call. And I don't think it took long for both of us to know that this was going to be a drastic change in not just audit, but all fields. I think going back to the original question, I don't think traditional audit hasn't necessarily broken. overnight. I think it's just starting to feel like using a flip phone in a smartphone world.
That analogy is really sticky. I'm definitely going to steal that, Rich. So it resonates, very deeply with me. I think you and I seem like, we have found ourselves in this profession as a third line of defense. I'm an accidental auditor myself. Deep down, I'm still that technologist who loves to code. And I couldn't be happier to experience, what we are witnessing now. As Dave, you mentioned the speed at which it's changing, and change is the only constant in this whole world. So I'm fascinated by this whole AI shift and how we use it. So thinking about the mindset shift, right? So yes, we have the tools. Yes, we're seeing the evolution on a day-to-day basis. But before the tools or the architecture, there's a mindset shift that's required. So what beliefs about the control, the ownership, or even what it's meant to audit have to change for swarm auditing to work?
I think what's what you said. It's having a view of internal audit that's fluid and the control environment that's fluid. You got to understand there's standards that we have to adhere to. There's rules that exist. There's policies and procedures that exist today in a corporation. You've got to navigate in between those. But you constantly have to be fluid and nimble and willing to completely revisit your design of controls. And don't be married to one view. Be open to many different views and to different tools as well. And that's I think been the biggest challenge for us, and Rich can speak to it better than I can, is the evolution of the tools at the pace with which they're evolving. We change every couple months. Our ability can grow faster and faster and faster, and we'll have to pivot to different tools that we use and approaches that we take. But it's just being nimble and open and not being tied to one view.
Yeah, I agree with both of you that the biggest blocker isn't the software itself. It's what auditors tell themselves about what makes them valuable. It's not, I do the work and that's what makes me valuable. It's, I can assure that the outcome is valid and sufficient. So the mindset shift is going from using AI to go from being a doer to a reviewer.
Makes total sense. So in all of this, where do you see the most resistance? Is it technical? Is it cultural? Or is it psychological?
What I want to start with is everything is so new right now that there's a legal component to data. And that is one of the most complex pieces of navigating through this, is aligning with risk, aligning with, what our programmatic governance is as a company over AI, and then with what we want to do. That, to me, from where I sit, is the biggest challenge that we have. I think what Rich does, the skill that he brings, all of that just makes it easy to move forward. It's just moving forward with legal and risk and compliance and our governance policy together. That's the challenge.
From my perspective, I've seen it's been the psychological element where people need to be given the permission to fail and fail forward. And thankfully, that comes from the top. And we've been fortunate enough to have that permission here at PayPal.
That's a huge kudos to you, Dave. And I completely agree, with this notion of, allowing your auditors to fail. And once you create that culture, then obviously the magic happens. And I heard about this acronym somewhere, which I'll mention in this podcast. The word fail is the first attempt in learning. And when I heard this, it's so sticky. It just stuck in my mind. And I've used it now thousands of times. But every time I say it, it just resonates even deeply, right? So it is your first attempt in learning. Let it be that learning exercise. Of course, when somebody, makes the same mistake again and again, then it's a different conversation we need to have. But, we definitely need to allow our auditors to experiment and fail. We do it through several ways, hackathons, giving them permission to work in the sandbox environment. And I'm actually excited seeing some of the traditional auditors who've been in the business for 20 plus years now leveraging Copilot in their day-to-day and really exploring it, in the angles that I never imagined before. So kudos to you, Dave, for creating this culture. Shifting to the topic of the leadership, the job displacement fears, because I get this question all the time. Is AI going to replace the auditors? What's going to happen to my jobs? As audit becomes more agent driven, how does the identity of the auditor evolve? And how do you respond to this, very real fears around AI replacing the judgment rather than amplifying it?
From my perspective, there definitely will be change and impact. There's no doubt about that with what we can do with the large language models and all the tools associated with that, from coding to analysis to data pull, data clean. It can do quite a bit of what we do right now. I think Rich described it really well earlier. You're going to move from a doer to a reviewers, providing that judgment, providing that view and that historical knowledge. My question is that path forward, and Rich and I have talked about this, of the having that historical knowledge, having that understanding of to have the judgment to challenge the results that you're seeing. That's going to be the part that has to continue to be developed. You have to have it to be successful. Perhaps it'll be AI that actually is that judgment down the road. Who knows? But certainly, the models can learn, and it's just they have to be checked along the way as they're learning. There will always be a role for an audit function. I think the 3 lines of defense model, which is common in financial institutions and other companies, I think that will change. I do think it'll be compressed down to a 2 lines of defense type of review, but we'll see as things evolve.
Rich, any other views from your side?
Yeah, to quote Charles Darwin exactly, it's not strength or intelligence, it's the responsiveness to change, which will lead the next generation of auditors specifically. I think you mentioned auditors in that quote too.
No, well said. I think the responsiveness to change is certainly one of the core skills. It's no longer a good to have, it's a must have. And it's how quickly you adapt and keep pace at it. Yes, as you mentioned before, ChatGPT 2 came in, and we've seen different versions, and now Gemini kind of giving competition to different models. And every time you see a new model coming in, it's how quickly you are adapting and not becoming dependent on one particular LLM. So that's a great segue to the next question, which is the AI that is built for audit versus AI adopted by audit. So I know that you guys haven't just adopted the enterprise AI, you have built AI for audit. So how did that change the way your function thinks about the GRC, the governance, risk, the responsible AI across a broader organization? And how has audit, in the sense, become a proving ground for AI discipline inside PayPal?
So right off the bat, you can't audit what you don't understand. So building AI gave us a better understanding of more so than what we would have gotten from a vendor. And doing so, I think we earned our seat at the table, going through the process, the governance. Nevertheless, it's a very tricky situation trying to get an AI project through the governance process with stakeholders knowing you will be auditing that process or already have. So I think that's where the human side of things comes into play and where relationships really, really matter.
That's great. I think it's the customer zero experience, which is how you are leveraging, AI is definitely going to inform you, what some of the pitfalls there could be, right? I mean, I am obviously fascinated with what we can achieve, but at the same time, I'm a bit concerned that people may start taking the shortcuts, and because you're able to wipe code and get something working very quickly, you may miss out on some of the basics, which is where I feel things like ITGC, IT general controls, are even more important in the space of AI. So, but I like what you said, Rich, which is you cannot audit what you don't know, and earning that seat at the table is extremely important. So I guess in terms of the audit planning, audit plans are always full. There are things that we have to do based on the risk assessment. Some of the functions like ourselves, we do have a lot of the regulatory driven audits that we have to do. on an annual basis. There is the audit cycle, driven audit plans that many people have. So how did you create, space, both organizationally as well as psychologically, for experimentation of AI, given that you still have to complete and deliver the plan that you've committed to the audit committee? And, what do you think is a bigger risk? Is it the trying or failing, trying and failing, or not trying at all?
Not trying at all, clearly, is you're going to be so far behind. Our profession is going to pass you up very quickly if you're not out there trying. And, we recognize that internally with our own team, where we were tracking who was using AI in any capacity, and then started leaning in on those people who clearly were afraid of it to help them identify very simple things that they can do, super simple things in daily, in writing email or writing a report or helping them analyze results. They're very simple things. We start there and then allow them to on their own grow. And then they see their peers doing things that are more challenging and exciting and cutting edge. And we kept that stuff in a repository and we talk about it with the whole team. So it creates a little competitiveness, and it also makes it a comfortable process as you start with the easy things. That's what we did internally. Holistically for our plan, it's like you said, there's a risk-based component of our plan, then there's the regulatory required audits in our plan that have to be done. The regulators are not going to be flexible in any possible way. So we allocated our resources appropriately to cover off on our audit plan holistically, as we normally would, as well as providing a bucket of hours for the experimentation. And then people are on their own time. Rich is a prime example, constantly experimenting with different things and different approaches and different tools. So it's a combination of many things across our team, but fundamentally, we as a leadership team, all of us are focused on knowing that 1, 2, 3 years down the road, we are going to be extremely advanced in AI, and it's going to have a large impact on how we risk assess the work that we can do very strategically, that we can't do today necessarily. That it's more cumbersome to get so strategic on specific types of findings and testing that we do, especially when you have second, third, fourth parties involved. So we are constantly evolving. It's just like you said at the beginning, we have to be this way. And we have minds already focused on what the future is, as well as those that are focused on executing on what we have to deliver for our regulators and for the boards across the globe. We have multiple boards that we report to.
I think there is nothing better than, creating some game, the gamification of learning, gamification around the experimentation. I mentioned hackathon previously. DTCC is going to host a hackathon in February, depending on, whenever this podcast comes out. But that's one of the ways in which we are trying to get people interested and excited about the experimentation on AI. And we do have a separate track for internal audit. So I'm excited to see what comes out of that experimentation and gamification, really. Rich, any points you have on this question?
No, I think Dave touched on most of it. I'm just thankful again from leadership and from the team in general that it's maybe not as strict as non-negotiable, but it is almost a requirement that we start using AI in work. And so it's at that point, it's not really any like a calendar trick. It's embedded in your process, and that's what it will be in the future, is embedded. It's not going to be an option at that point.
Makes total sense. I'm going to ask you the next question, because I know this is topic near and dear to your heart, which is the topic of this podcast itself, the term swarm auditing, right? So the swarm models, they depend on the collaboration across auditors, data scientists, technologists, out the business. So how do you design that collaboration intentionally rather than hoping that it happens organically? And why the term swarm auditing?
So swarm auditing is something we're really excited about because it sits right at the intersection of where internal audit is heading and where AI agent technology is already today. At its core, swarm auditing operates in multiple levels, the first of which is about agent orchestration. As audit departments start bringing AI agents into their processes, you quickly move beyond just one agent doing one task. You end up with teams of agents which are referred to as agent swarms, working together. How do you coordinate them? How do you make sure their output is accurate and consistent? How do you make sure they are operating within boundaries? These are techniques that we can adopt from the software development community for internal audit. But here's where it gets really interesting. The second level is how do you integrate between those teams of agents and your team of auditors? Agents aren't replacing your audit team in the near-term future. So the question becomes, how do you organize this collaboration? How do auditors and agents work together in a way that's safe, secure, and always produces the best result? That system, that framework for human-agent collaboration in audit is what we mean when we talk about swarm auditing. Now, this is obviously the high-level view. We'll be diving into the specifics and practical details at GAM.
Makes sense. Dave, from your perspective, when your audit shop, starts experimenting with AI, builds these, agents, the swarms of agents, and obviously they're collaborating with the auditors, they're working together, and they end up developing something which then can potentially be desired by the first line or the second line, and they come to you that, hey, can we have this? And obviously we all always worry about the blurring the traditional lines between the three lines of defense. So how do you manage that perceived conflict of independence?
Yeah, no, that's a good question because we data analytics, where we started back in 2016, I'd say we're really advanced in that, and so we're constantly developing scripts in the different audits that we do that'll help the second line of defense or the first line of defense. We give them those scripts knowing that you own them. We don't own these things. You're going to modify them to fit what you're going to do it. Here's how we thought about the approach to risk and to control, and here's how we design this script, and here's the value it can bring to you. We're constantly in that business, but we ensure to them that this is your tool. You own this tool going forward. We will take a look at the tool when we come back to see how it's been modified and if it's complete, accurate, and sustainable. So it's something we've been doing for quite a long time. And we'll just have another version of that with any form of AI that we develop and allow them to use. We also collaborate as they build their AI. They're talking to us about, one, does this look okay? And two, have you done this? And many times we've already experimented with what they're looking at.
I am a strong believer that audit is a perfect place, of trying out different, innovative experiments without that, being afraid of failures, because it almost becomes an incubator of ideas where you're better off trying these out with an audit without breaking the bank, that some would say, than do it in the most business critical operation of your firm. So it's great to share the ideas. It's great to influence the second line, and in many ways also the first line, where they can learn some of the ways in which audit has looked at things differently, identified the blind spots, and some things that we would expect the management to do it themselves as well. So this is great.
I will say too, we learn as well from them.
Yeah.
We can't be everything everywhere all the time, and we learn a great deal about their views on risk, data, how to use the data. So it's a two-way street for sure.
Absolutely. So I guess moving from the tools to true swarms, right? As Rich mentioned, many firms are stuck in the concept of Gen AI limited to the prompt libraries. Yes, those are important things. That's a start. But then, how do you move away from, or not away from, but from the chatbots and the co-pilots towards the agentic swarms, which is obviously the next logical steps. Your team has done it. But what does that next actually look like in a mature swarm-based audit function?
In a mature one,
Yep.
which I'm not sure if we're even at that point yet, is going beyond just prompt engineering to full context engineering and having, again, that extra layer of how the swarms of agents integrate with auditors, the teams of auditors. And then I guess you could take it even one step further than that. It's how different internal audit departments can collaborate with one another, and whether that's the open source model that is popular in software, or something similar, I think that's the third tier of swarm auditing. And I think having that collaboration between us would benefit the community as a whole.
That's well said, and this is really an important point, which is we get this through the different IA conferences that we go to, and one of the benefits of going into these conferences is you get to meet with people from different firms at different levels of maturity, but then you share these experiences and you learn. We should definitely be doing more of that, and as I mentioned before, things like hackathon, where you will learn from different use cases. And yes, I think there will be some firms who would like to keep that secret sauce with them. But most of the things that we do with respect to our day-to-day audit processes is not a secret sauce. So if there is a way that we can come up with different ways in which we can use technology to make our lives better, you're actually helping the whole industry, the whole profession, and we should be sharing that. Dave, I know you wanted to share something.
No, I think the collaboration piece is absolutely critical. And it's something that we do now where our audit ops team is created. They started a group. I don't know actually what they call it, but we have different firms, different companies, their internal audit shops get together and talk about their use cases, their advancement, their challenges, and it's a shared knowledge that we all have together. There aren't the people that are hiding information. It's just like Rich said, the only way we're all going to evolve is by sharing this information. We do that, and then we also have internally an AI council where we have with internal audit with our top leaders. Rich is there, and we talk about everything that's happening real time on development of use cases as well as modifications of use cases or additional use cases that we have. And then there's that challenge thing that you talked about that's going on within the team. We discussed that as well, the successes and how do we communicate that and make sure that we're inspiring people to continually grow and use this. And we talked earlier about that model of it's okay to fail. In fact, that's how we learn. That level of trust that you have, when you have all that combined together, it really does build bravery in people and allows them to push themselves a little beyond what they thought was possible and to take those risks. And knowing that we're going to be there to support them and help make things work or figure out what went wrong and why.
Well said. Yeah, I think seeing that art of the possible is really an important thing. I think, I keep saying this. It's not about, what tools you use. It's about your imagination. You're only limited by your imagination in this case. So I guess to close the podcast, the last question I have, and I think we can go on for hours on a topic like this. But if there is a CAE listening today, there's a chief audit executive listening today to this podcast and wanted to take one meaningful step towards a swarm auditing this year, what would you advise?
Be open to it. Open your mind to anything that's going to change how you approach your audit methodology and building efficiencies and understanding about the capabilities that you have at your fingertips. But Rich will have a more articulate response.
Mine is just promotional. Come to our GAM session.
That's a great plug, Rich, and I'm actually excited for the GAM session in Las Vegas. And this is one of those things, what happens in Las Vegas, is actually going to come with me, and I'm going to talk about it. So I'm excited, for your session. And I feel the future of audit is not just testing these controls, but it's about how we are orchestrating the trust, how we are orchestrating the different ways in which we can innovate, and the bridge that we have between the traditional assurance and the digital first models. Thank you, and again, I'm looking forward to your session at IIA GAM.
Hey, Audit Pros, if you enjoyed this episode as much as we did, you can listen to all three gentlemen at GAM 2026, happening in Las Vegas from March 9th to the 11th. This is just a quick overview of swarm auditing and what it means for the profession. If you're interested in listening to the full session, you can secure your spot at the IIA.org. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and rate us. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also catch other episodes on YouTube or at the IIA.org. That's THEIIA.org.